Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we'll be updating the power rankings once again for Big Brother Canada 10 following week 2, and I am recording this on Sunday, March 13th, so everything I'm saying will be up to that date, even though this video will technically be coming out on Monday, so I won't be accounting for stuff that's happened since then. And this was a very interesting week of feeds. We'll obviously be getting into that. However, I will say up front that I do kind of regret my week 1 power rankings, as I feel like there wasn't as much information as I would have liked. I certainly didn't have all the information that I would have liked to make proper assessments about these people's position within the game. And even then, when I did have information, I don't feel like I properly reflected that in the actual positions that these people took on the list. However, now with there being a full week of feeds, I feel like I do have a better understanding of the game, and hopefully that will translate to more concrete power rankings moving forward. But hopefully this will still be an interesting list nonetheless. And like I said, I'll be ranking these people based on how likely I think it is that they'll win the game based on their current game position. But without further ado, let's get right into the list. So starting off the list at number 15, we have the boot from this previous week. We have Jay, and it's pretty unfortunate that we're losing one of the two non-binary players at this point. However, if we're looking at the game that they played, it wasn't particularly great, and it's not too surprising to see them go out here. So obviously I mentioned last week how they weren't in the best position given the fact that Marty won HOH and the fact that they were outside the core power structure. And I did give credit for Jay, like socializing a lot and really building bonds with people. However, the issue is that they were never able to translate that into game relationships, and through that, they weren't ever able to play actively. Their biggest issue was the fact that they played way too passively, and by the time they decided to get around to campaigning, it was too late. The fact that they waited so long to even start campaigning, even knowing that they were a potential target, is an issue in itself, and I'm not too surprised that they were evicted here. I don't think Jay's the worst player in the world, but considering the fact that they were passive in the game, they were outside the core power structure, and they didn't really do much to save themselves, leaves them here at number 15. And with that, we are now moving to the 14 players still in the game, and like I said, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think it is that they'll win the game based on their current game position and the gameplay that they're actually demonstrating. But at number 14, we have the person who I think is the most likely to be evicted this week. We have Betty, and Betty has been pretty disappointing in terms of a player in the season, where she hasn't really been in the majority that much throughout a lot of the season. While she did join that Man Down Alliance, which is a women's alliance, it hasn't really held strong, and even then we see plenty of other women like Jclynn and Helena talking about how they don't really trust Betty and how they're reluctant to really include her into the grouping that the other women are working with, so that's not particularly great. She gets way too emotional when she's put up as a pawn during Marty's HOH, which isn't particularly great, and like the fact that she was reacting this way really demonstrates how emotional of a player she is, and it's really bad in my personal opinion. And then there's obviously the fact that she came into the week as a house target, and while Kyle has been sort of playing around that for a lot of the week, and we'll talk about Kyle's HOH soon, I mean, Betty does eventually end up as the replacement nominee, or the most likely person to go up as the replacement. And I feel like they probably will go home if they go up against Stephanie, which seems like the plan for the time being. Kyle seems to be targeting Betty, and it seems like the house is more incentivized to keep Stephanie at this point, especially after all the drama that's happened. So I feel like Betty has really low chances of actually surviving the week. But even aside from that, she's demonstrated herself to be a pretty bad player, not really in the majority of anything. And even when she was put up on the block, I feel like she handled that very poorly. So because of that, I have her here at number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and we have one of the people that is currently on the block and will probably stay on the block moving forward, and here we have Stephanie. And I did consider putting Stephanie a bit below Betty in the sense that while it's likely that Betty is the target and will go home, it's not a guarantee that Betty goes home necessarily, as there's definitely movement that could lead to Stephanie being evicted. But even outside that, I found that she's been very expendable in the game. It seems like the only person that she's really close to is Herman, and even that is due to them being in a showmance to a degree, as well as Kyle, but even then, Kyle deciding to target her initially is a really bad move on his end, but still the fact that she's in that position is pretty bad. But the main reason I have Stephanie this low is that I feel like she's just one of the more expendable people in the house. She isn't really in the core power structure, and while she was a member of the single person's alliance, I feel like that is sort of on its way out as it's being exposed more, and new power structures are sort of centering around other people. And I feel like through that, that sort of leaves Stephanie on the outs, and I wouldn't be surprised if people just decide to put her up. I mean, it seems like people don't have that much issue getting rid of her. I mean, we even saw during Marty's HOH when, like Marty said that she was the house target, and the only reason he didn't put her up is because she made a deal with him during that second HOH where he wouldn't put her up. And even then, that got people thinking, well, why don't you put Stephanie up as a backdoor option? And it just sort of was more of a bad look on Marty than a good move on Stephanie's end. So I feel like that was a knock against her. And like I said, I feel like she is someone who's expendable. While she probably will get the votes to stay, it seems like most of the house is centering around getting rid of Betty. It's not a guarantee, and things can definitely still change to where she is evicted. But even if she survives this week, I don't have a ton of confidence in her longevity in the game. I feel like she could still be a house target moving forward, to where someone could put her up and send her out, as it seems like she isn't that integral to anyone's game. So because of that, I can't have her too high. She's here at number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12, and I do wish I could put this person higher, but I feel like I couldn't really justify it. We have the other non-binary player in the game. We have Jessica, and again, I feel like Jessica has been doing a bit better since week 1, in the sense that they've been talking to more people and they've been attempting to get into more people's heads and into people's plans. However, I feel like it just hasn't been enough. Now, I think the biggest credit I can give them is the fact that they were able to convince Marty during week 2 to not put them up as a target, even though they were considered a house target at that point. I think that is somewhat impressive on their end. And they have been talking to more people, definitely getting into people's relationships more, to the point where I feel like they are slightly better positioned than they were before. But even then, I can't really give them too much credit, in the sense that they aren't really in the core power structure. I mean, we really literally saw this new alliance form called the Rebel Rejects, which includes a lot of people that were previously on the outs. But the fact that Jessica doesn't seem to be included in that is a knock against them. And even so, while they were able to effectively keep the target off their back, I feel like they will probably remain a potential target moving forward. And I feel like while they have been playing harder and definitely socializing more and building more relationships, I feel like it just hasn't been enough, and they still aren't in that great of a position, especially compared to some other people we'll be talking about soon who were in a similar position earlier on, in the fact that they weren't in the initial power structure but are now finding something for themselves. Jessica doesn't seem to have that at this point, and that's a big reason I have them here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11, and this was the biggest misread I had from week 1. I really thought this person was a better player than I gave them credit for. However, I feel like now it's become more apparent that they just haven't been playing that hard. And here we have Josh. And I know people are probably going to make fun of the week 1 video because I had Josh in number 2, which I think is pretty well warranted in my opinion. Again, I felt like he was someone who was playing a lot more actively than they actually were. But I think this past week has made it very apparent that a lot of people just don't seem to trust Josh that much. And a lot of that is his own fault, in the fact that he's not actively talking to people, which not only causes him to not be included in the power structures, but it's in turn creating the cycle where people are less likely to approach him moving forward as an option, in the sense that they feel like he is someone that can't be talked about game with, which is pretty bad. Now, mind you, I think they've done slightly better since Kyle won HOH, as we see people try to include him in things. I mean, he is included in the new Rebel Rejects Alliance, although he isn't quite the core of that. However, I feel like he is someone who, again, hasn't been playing the best game in the world. He just lost Jay, who is one of his closer allies, which losing him is not particularly ideal. And again, I feel like Josh is someone that hasn't really been included in the core power structure to this point, and it's something that I have to hold against him. Again, I feel like I completely misread Josh after the first week. I felt like a lot of that carried over from my preseason assessment of him. But I feel like now, like I said, we have a better idea of who he is as a player, and that he's been playing very passively. And because of that, I had to leave him here on number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and I wouldn't consider this person to be in an exceptionally great position, but I feel like they've definitely improved over time. And here we have Kevin, and again, I'm somewhat impressed by Kevin's performance this past week, where I feel like he's done a great job at building bonds with a lot of people on the outside. Like he's talked to Helena, he's talked to Summer, he's talked to Tanisha, really ingratiate himself with them to the point where they want to work with him now. He's now a part of their new alliance, the Rebel Rejects. But even before that, I was impressed by his ability to keep the target off his back. I mean, we saw him talk with Marty and convince him to not put him up as a nominee, either initial or as a replacement. I felt like that was pretty impressive, despite the fact that he was someone who could have been a house target. I find that impressive that Kevin was able to keep the target off his back. And then with Kyle, I mean, he did build that relationship with Kyle early on. Kyle was one of the few people that was close to him in the beginning. And I feel like we are seeing that now where Kyle's HOH and he isn't even a consideration to be targeted. So I feel like that's something in Kevin's credit as well. And again, I feel like Kevin has been finding his footing as more time has passed on in the game. Again, people are starting to pick up on the fact that he is someone that knows the game. He's starting to wean off this perception that he's a dummy and that he's sort of down on himself. He's sort of starting to pick up more confidence. And through that, people are starting to get closer to him. I feel like there is genuine credit you can give to Kevin, and I've been impressed by him so far. But even so, I don't think he's in the best position in the house. Like, while he is in the Rebel Rejects, I feel like Summer and Tanisha are more than likely the core of that for the time being. And while Kevin definitely has opportunities to get more within the core of that, it's not a guarantee. And I feel like even beyond that, like his safety isn't entirely secure moving forward. But the fact that he's been able to keep himself off the block to this point is pretty impressive on his end. And because of that, I had to put him here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have a very interesting person to talk about, both in my week 1 assessment of their game, but also with the more recent developments that have happened. We have the current HOH. We have Kyle, and I think Kyle is someone who I definitely underrated in my week 1 power rankings. In hindsight, I feel like the main thing that dragged him down in week 1 was the fact that I felt like he was a conventional player that could have emerged as a big threat later on in the game. And that was definitely bolstered by people talking about him being targeted later on in the game. However, I did acknowledge his strong position at the time. And in hindsight, I probably should have put him at number 2 during week 1. However, I feel like obviously his HOH reign has been pretty disastrous to the point where he's kind of ruined his position up to this point. Now, we definitely saw signs of him overplaying, like even earlier on, where he definitely gave off the perception that he was a smarter player, which in turn makes people more suspicious of him. But then once he wins HOH, that's when things really get interesting. Now, I guess to set the stage, I mean, Kyle was, again, in one of the best positions in the house. He had a final 2 deal with Gino. He was within the Savage 7. He was in all these sub-alliances that could have propelled him moving forward. He was even in this 4-person group with himself, Gino, Marty, and Moose, soon to be replaced with Herman. He was definitely in a great position moving forward, and it didn't seem like people were willing to target him earlier on. And I didn't even mention his relationship with Kevin. That was something else in his corner as well. And considering his position, he was definitely in a position to have a safe HOH. Put a Betty or a house target in Jessica, send that person out the door, and then again get no blood on his hands and sort of maintain that position for the foreseeable future. However, he kind of gets HOH-itis, where he definitely wants to maintain the power structure to a degree, but also make a big move in order to put something on his resume. Now, the interesting thing about Kyle is that, yes, despite his position being pretty great from earlier on, he recognized that had the Savage 7 got all the way down to it, that he was going to be in a pretty bad position with that Savage 7, and through that, he wanted to build a more solid core that did not center around Herman, who would have benefited the most from the Savage 7 remaining true. And through that, we see him initially target Stephanie. Now, obviously, the decision to target Stephanie was pretty questionable, as Stephanie, again, while she's technically someone who isn't really aligned with too many people, is someone who was still technically within his own alliance, and someone who would have gone on Herman's radar had she gone out the door. But then later on, we see the way he handles it is so bad, where he tells her that he heard about her turning on the men at some point, which prompted her to bring up Moose, the person that he suspected of relaying this information. And we see this whole confrontation breakdown where Stephanie is sort of shouting at Kyle to make her point across, while Moose is trying to de-escalate the situation. And I should mention that Moose was someone who was definitely loyal to Kyle, and Also someone who was committed to targeting Herman at some point, feeling that definitely would have benefited Kyle's game. In the fact that if Herman is able to be weakened and taken out at some point, then Kyle could be able to build a power structure that benefits him more so than anyone else. And there's also the fact that Kyle and Moose have an out of the game relationship as they went to the same college together. So that's something. However, Kyle takes this whole situation and decides to target Moose. And this is a very terrible decision because not only does getting rid of Moose take away, again, another one of his allies, but it also takes away one of the few people that would have been willing to turn on Herman at some point. And while we definitely saw Moose certainly falling on the outs, where he was getting replaced by Herman by that 4-person group of him, Gino, and Marty, getting rid of Moose is still a pretty bad decision in the fact that it allows Herman to more easily turn around and reassert his dominance of the game. So I feel like either way you look at it, it's a pretty bad decision. And on top of that, he ruins his relationship with Stephanie by telling her that she would be going up as a potential target. And he keeps changing his mind over and over again, where he can't make up his mind over whether Moose or Stephanie are going to be the targets. And in turn, that really sketches out both of them. And on top of that, he goes around and tells people, like, trying to lay down the 7 and make sure that his position is secure. But in the process, he definitely makes people more suspicious of him. It makes it seem more likely that he's going to flip on the Savage 7 at some point. And through that, people become more suspicious of him. And ultimately, he puts up Moose and Stephanie, of course, and Moose ultimately wins the veto. So not only does he ruin his relationship with 2 people that were his allies at one point, but one of them wins the veto, and he eventually ropes his way back around to targeting Betty, who again should have been his house target to begin with. And through that, he keeps around Stephanie, who definitely has no incentive to work with Kyle moving forward. So either way you look at it, this has been a pretty terrible HOH, and definitely one that ruins his position moving forward, as well as one that makes him a potential target moving forward. So again, all this has been pretty bad. However, the main reason I don't have Kyle even lower than this is because I feel like even though he has ruined his position, he still has potential allies moving forward. He still has Gino, he still has some people that could work with him moving forward. And considering that he is pretty capable in competitions, I feel like he is someone who could definitely win HOH, or possibly Gino win HOH as well, and definitely get him out of a sticky situation. So I think there are definitely outs for Kyle, even though this has been a pretty bad week and the house has been starting to turn against him. However, considering the fact that he came to the week with a pretty great position and has since ruined that, is a big reason that he has fallen all the way to number 9, even though I initially had him at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 8, and I can actually see this person being even lower than Kyle and some of the people we already talked about. However, I feel like with the situation in the house changing so quickly, I feel like this person could have some outs moving forward, and here we have Moose. And obviously Moose was a target at one point this week, with Kyle turning on him and thinking that Moose was the one spreading this idea that the women were going to turn on the men at some point, and obviously Moose ended up being the target as a result, only to win veto and take himself off. However, even before that, he wasn't in that great of a position, where he was technically part of this 4-person group at one point with Kyle, Gino, and Marty. However, we saw him start to get replaced by Herman in that group, and that's not particularly great. And there are definitely people getting sketched out by him, definitely people thinking that he's playing too hard, and those are still very valid concerns, and I can see Moose being targeted in the next couple weeks anyway. However, I feel like, again, with the situation in the house changing so quickly, where people seem to be turning against Kyle, I think that buys Moose some time to rebuild some of the bonds that he has broken through being targeted. Maybe him being targeted has opened his eyes a little bit. And there's still the idea of Herman being this big threat in the game. Although even then, I feel like the power structure is kind of more so solidified around Herman, if I'm being honest. So I definitely think Herman has a potential to move up, while Moose has the potential to move down. Moose is someone I'm still very concerned about within the game. However, the main reason he's as high as number 8 is because of the fact that the situation in the house is changing pretty quickly, and it's changing in a way that could give him opportunities to move up. However, if I was basing this based on stuff that's happened before Kyle's HOH, I definitely would have had Moose lower. So because of that, I have him here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and I wasn't too sure what to do with this person even now, as they're, on one hand, they are in the core power structure, and I feel like through that, they should be higher in the list. However, I feel like they're also someone who isn't as well positioned within that, and there have been people talking about getting rid of them at a point, and here we have Jclynn. And Jclynn is someone I'm still not entirely sure about. I mean, she is technically someone who was being targeted to a degree last week, but they won the veto and used it on themselves. And they since been talked about as a potential target by the women. She hasn't really been trusted by a lot of the women. And what isn't helping matters either is the fact that she's in a showmance with Gino at this point. People have been noticing that, and it's possible that if someone wins HOH and wants to take a shot at the showmances, that I feel like a Jclynn could be a fatality of that rather than Gino, who is someone who, again, has been very well positioned, even more so than her. So people can potentially cut her over him. So that's definitely a very precarious position to be in. But I feel like them being in the core power structure is a big reason they aren't lower on the list. And I can definitely see Gino protecting them for a decent chunk of the game. Like, it's really only if people want to take a shot at Gino without directly going after Gino that Jclynn could be put in danger. It's just more so whether they see it as getting rid of a showmance or if they're seeing it more as taking a shot at a well-positioned player. So because of that, I have Jclynn here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we definitely have someone who's more insulated in the core right now than some of the people we'll be talking about soon. But I also feel like they're more likely to be picked off at some point, and here we have Marty. And again, Marty's another pretty big jump off in this past week. Not so much because I think Marty is a great player or anything, but more so because I've been impressed by their ability to get into a decent core. I mean, he's in the core with Kyle, Gino, and now Herman. That's definitely putting him in a pretty strong position moving forward. And I feel like he's mostly gone along with most of the house, with the exception of Betty, but that's more so Betty being emotional than anything else. And again, I feel like Marty is pretty well positioned for the time being. However, I also think he's quite vulnerable if certain people win HOH. Although I feel like he would definitely have the backing of Kyle, Gino, and a lot of the guys if he were to be targeted by one of the women. So I definitely think he's definitely in it for quite a bit of time moving forward. However, I would be shocked if he wasn't cut towards the end. I can see him easily being targeted due to being likable and being a threat. I mean, we literally just saw him being saved by Canada, even though he wasn't in any danger of being put up on the block. And I feel like through that, that's definitely something that can be used against him moving forward. Like if people feel like that he's too likable or that he's going to win if he gets to the end. So definitely feel like that probably hurt his game more than helped it. And again, I feel like Marty is someone who definitely is someone who's going to be a threat towards the end. However, the fact that they are so well positioned within this core group is a big reason that I had them here in number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and I feel pretty good about this top 5. I feel like these 5 people have been playing relatively well to this point. However, the person number 5 is someone who I think is the most likely to be targeted, and here we have Tanisha. And I feel like Tanisha's game has been characterized as being close to Summer for a lot of it, and I feel like they've been doing decent work at building a power structure in recent days. Obviously, her and Summer have been the core of Rebel Rejects, definitely a group bringing a lot of the outsiders, and I think that's been pretty impressive on Tanisha's heart, and I feel like she's been pretty likable as well. Now, the main reason I have her here at number 5, though, is I feel like she's the most likely to be targeted moving forward. I feel like she definitely could be set to be targeted at some point. I mean, we have Moose talking about her, Summer, and Josh as being very tight, which technically isn't true. They're not that close to Josh, but even so, that's not particularly great. And I wouldn't be surprised if she was someone who started to be targeted relatively soon, kind of like Stephanie. However, I feel like she's way better positioned than Stephanie for one, and I feel like she is someone who probably has plenty of potential moving forward in the game. However, we even see Marty and people like Kevin start to pick up on her game, and through that, I feel like there is potential for Tanisha to be targeted soon, along with those women. However, I feel like Tanisha is the most likely of those 3 women to be targeted. So that's definitely a big reason I have her relatively low. However, I feel like she's still been doing pretty well, so I have her here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and I have someone pretty similar to talk about to Tanisha. We have Summer, and I feel like their games are largely similar in my opinion. The main difference is that I feel like Summer has been a lot more active within the game with building bonds with people and really building the alliance of the outsiders, in my opinion, where we definitely see her bond a lot with Kevin, really get him involved in things. We've seen her talk with Jessica as well. And while Jessica hasn't been included in that group, she still has been doing more of the work and reaching out to them. And I feel like Summer has been more active within the game than Tanisha and probably less likely to be seen as a threat in the short term. However, I still do worry about her long-term prospects. I feel like like Summer is someone who probably could still be targeted towards the end game, in my opinion. I feel like right now they've been more active in building the alliance, and I feel like if the Rebel Rejects are ultimately a powerful group, that Summer would benefit a lot from that. So I feel like that alone is a big reason that I have Summer this high, but I feel like number 4 is about as high as I can put her given the positioning of other people right now. Now we're moving on to number 3, and again, we're kind of wrapping up the outsiders tier for me, and here we have Helena, and I've been very impressed by Helena's game as well. Like Summer, I feel like she's been very active in the game at building bonds with a lot of people around the house, and unlike people like Jay, who socialized a lot without actually building game relationships, I feel like Helena has effectively built game relationships with the people she's been talking to, and obviously she's been included in the Rebel Rejects along with Summer and Tanisha, but then I think the main thing that puts Helena above those two and at the number 3 spot is the fact that in addition to being well positioned with the outsiders, she's also fairly well insulated with the people in the majority. While she isn't technically in the majority alliance, she is someone that has good relationships with the people in the majority and definitely has someone who people have discussed bringing into the majority of points, and I feel like that is something to her credit. I also feel like she's the least likely of the 3 to be targeted moving forward. She's been doing a very effective job of managing her threat level. She isn't being perceived as being a duo, unlike Summer and Tanisha. And I feel like those things are enough to put her above those 3 women that I mentioned and pretty high on the list as well. However, I feel like the top 2 people are in the majority and people that are very well positioned within it. So because of that, I have to leave Helena here at number 3. And with that, we are now moving to the top 2. Again, I feel like this is the clear top 2 so far. And it was sort of tough for me because I feel like one person has been playing more passively, but is probably more safe in the long run, while the other person has been playing more actively, but is probably in a bit more danger if I'm being perfectly honest. But I decided to go with the more passive player. Number 2, we have Gino. And I know I had Gino at number 1 last week. A lot of that was because of his very strong position in the house, and I still think he is the most well-positioned person in the house. He has his group of the Kyle, Marty, and Herman. He also has the Retreat Alliance. He also has the Savage 7, which benefits him quite a bit. And he has his showmans with Jclynn as well. No one seems to be targeting him for the time being. However, I decided to knock him down a bit because I'm wondering how much of that is active, as I'm sure a lot of people are. I feel like the thing about Gino is that it's hard to really tell whether he's playing the game or if this strong positioning is simply the result of people gravitating towards him and really liking him and wanting to work alongside him. And again, there's also the question of him being a physical threat down the line anyway, so it's certainly hard for me to reward Gino too much for that, but he is still technically in the best position in the house for the time being, and I've been impressed by his ability to maintain that position. And while Kyle's kind of ruined that position, it's sort of interesting how none of that has reflected on Gino at all, and I feel like Gino is still willing to work with Kyle, who he built the final 2 deal with. I didn't even mention that, but I feel like Gino definitely has a lot of stuff going for him moving forward. However, I feel like the number 1 person definitely has quite a bit going for them as well, so I had to leave Gino here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I think is the most likely to win Big Brother Canada 10 right now is Herman, and I've been pretty impressed by Herman's game so far. I know I had him only ranked at number 5 last week, as I feel like there are other people that are better positioned than him, but I've been very impressed by his ability to solidify the Savage 7 up to this point. And I feel like if the Savage 7 is able to get down, that he is in the best position to win the game from that point. Obviously, we saw him being included into the core of Kyle, Gino, and Marty, sort of replacing Moose as a result. And I feel like people aren't really targeting Herman for the most part. Moose and Kyle are sort of the main people doing that, but even then, they're not really seeing him as someone to go after right away, more so buying their time. And even then, Kyle did target Moose this week as a way of weakening the women, not seeming to realize that doing so would have actually benefited Herman the most. And while Moose won the veto, and Moose will probably stay in the game, Moose probably has his eyes on Kyle at this point, and there's a good chance that Herman could benefit quite a bit from this. I feel like if Herman is able to get Kyle and Moose out of the game, then he is in a prime position to make a deep run. Plus, I feel like other people like Gino and Marty within his core are more likely to be targeted over him. I've just been very impressed by his ability to solidify things with people, and he's been very active as well, way more than Gino in terms of getting that position that he's been in. So I think there's a lot going for Herman. Mind you, I think he could still be targeted moving forward. If Moose wins HOH in the near future, I could see him still trying to take a shot at Herman, sort of looking past Kyle. However, I feel like Herman definitely has the most allies right now, and I feel like through that, he's definitely in a good position to get deep into the game, possibly even outlasting people that could oppose him in the future. So I feel like for all those reasons, I feel like Herman is the most likely person to win Big Brother Canada 10 at this point. And there we go. That will do it for this week's Power Rankings. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And like I said, I'll be back again next week breaking down what happens on the feeds again. And through that, updating the Power Rankings again. Survivor 42 is now in full swing, so that's been very fun to cover. And of course, Australian Survivor is still happening, so I'm doing Power Rankings for all three of those. Stay tuned for that. Plus, I have other stuff planned for the future. There's a lot of stuff coming. But for now, that is the video. See ya.